Know Dr. Novak, but I'm gonna introduce her in case there are a few people who don't. Dr. Alison Novak is a scientist at KITE, and she's also an assistant professor in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy and Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education at U of T. She received her Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology from the University of Waterloo and her Master of Science and PhD in Rehabilitation Science from Queen's University. Dr. Novak's primary research area focuses on understanding mobility in challenging environments and the impact of aging, disability, and environmental factors to reduce the risk of falls and to support aging-in-place strategies. Dr. Novak is actively involved with current changes to the National Building Code of Canada and Canadian accessibility standards to build age-friendly, accessible, and safe environments. Please join me in a welcome round of applause.
Okay, thanks guys, thanks for coming. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, and everyone online, if you can't hear me, I don't know because I can't see the Zoom, so I'm hoping everyone online can hear me. So today, I thought this was timely because I'm wrapping up a project right now, and we're looking at understanding the use of wayfinding technology by people with disabilities, and the project's ending at the end of August. So when I received this invitation to present, it was really timely because we're finishing this project, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity to highlight some of the research we've done in this area. I run the Enable lab here at KITE, and it's the Environments, Aging, and Biomechanics Laboratory. If anyone's interested in seeing some of our research, you can go to our lab's website. But we really have a mandate to look at how do we improve the built environment? How does it affect safety and accessibility? One of our goals is looking at the public perspective on safety prioritized design and accessible design, universal design. And then we do a lot of research to understand how we can improve safety and accessibility through, it's not research, sorry, a lot of our research is translated into policy or to impact policy, we hope. So you can visit our website and look at some of our current projects. What I thought I'd come to talk to you today about is what we're calling the Wayfinding Technology Project. And there's the project's website. You can get a little bit more information there. We're funded by Accessibility Standards Canada. This was a year-long project. It's taken just over a year. We got a little bit of an extension. And co-investigators, Jenny Campos and Tilak Dutta, Iris Levine, David Houston, all from KITE. We've had some excellent students be a part of this project. Theanna Edwards. Theanna's right there. Elo and Esther were OT students that worked on this project throughout the past year as well. We do have some project partners, Rick Hansen Foundation, CNIB, Age Well, Deafblind Ontario, and Canadian Disability Foundation. So it really is a collaborative project with the stakeholders and with investigators here at KITE. And our goal of this project was, we sort of had three main goals. One was, ultimately, we want to inform the inclusion of wayfinding technology in accessibility standards. That's our broader goal. And so we did this in a kind of three-phase approach. First, we did an environmental scan to look at current practice. How are wayfinding technologies being incorporated within standards right now? I'm not presenting any of the summary with respect to our environmental scan, but we did do that. So what our final report will provide is a resource for policymakers or others who, maybe organizations who want to look to standards for the inclusion of wayfinding tech. And that was phase one of the project. The big sort of component of the project was to understand user perspectives relating to wayfinding tech. And to do this, we conducted a national survey. That's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to present some of our survey results. And then once we summarize our survey results, we look to develop a core set of recommendations for the consideration of the standardization of wayfinding tech. And we did that using somewhat of a co-design approach with our stakeholder groups. So that's sort of how the project was laid out. And like I said, today, what I'm going to talk to you about is that national survey and some of the recommendations that are coming from that national survey that we conducted. Okay, so to start, I'm going to give you a little bit background on wayfinding as a concept, what wayfinding tech is, or how we're defining wayfinding tech, and then I'll move into the survey. Wayfinding, we can really think of it as a simple concept, but a complex process. So wayfinding really, really simply refers to the process of finding your way to a destination using cues given by the environment. And lots of people define wayfinding in different ways. I'm just going to give you the CSA definition of wayfinding. It refers to a spatial problem-solving process based upon consistent use and organization of sensory cues in the environment that individuals use to understand where their location is, know where their desired destination is, and how to get to that desired destination from their present location. So wayfinding as a concept includes a lot of, there's a lot of components to wayfinding. It seems simple, but there is complexity added. We have to think about orientation. A person has to define their orientation in the environment before they start that navigation process. Once they start route navigation, there's spatial decision-making throughout the route that has to happen. And there's decision-making at various points along the route. So intersections, and I don't mean like a physical intersection of a street crossing, I just mean like somewhere where they have to decide to turn left or right. So an intersection, a decision-making intersection to some extent. There's also spatial decision-making one might need to make due to environmental constraints. So they approach a barrier or an obstacle. There's a decision-making process that has to happen to continue the wayfinding process. Wayfinding itself is really considered a visually demanding process. Individuals are required to sort of continuously use visual search for landmarks that would help them inform the next action that they would undertake, or for cueing for the next action. So it's really a highly visual process for many individuals, and we probably take for granted for individuals with non-impaired vision. We would use our vision in the wayfinding process. You can imagine for a person with a disability, somebody who is blind, a blind pedestrian, or a pedestrian with low vision, the reliance of the wayfinding process on visual cues could present a barrier, or does present a barrier for them. And there's a lot of attention and memory requirements that add to the complexity of the wayfinding process. So if somebody's reading a map that tells them to get from point A to point B in a museum, and that map doesn't travel with them, there's a lot of memory requirements for that individual that they need to navigate to the final destination. So a lot of complexity added to this sort of simple concept of wayfinding. Traditional wayfinding, and our team sort of operationally defined traditional wayfinding to include the physical or architectural elements that may help with the process. So in accessibility standards, these are commonly standardized within our policies. This would include lighting, this could include signage, this could include tactile warning indicators. So on the screen here, when I'm showing images of, I have images of signs, and these are directional signs. There could be other types of signs: identification signs, directional signs, informational signs, regulatory signs. So all of the signage is part of traditional wayfinding elements. Lighting cues. Lighting cues are really important for guiding someone, especially in emergency egress scenarios where we might not have overhead lighting in a space, and we need to illuminate the floor to direct someone out in an emergency situation. So lighting cues can also be provided to assist with wayfinding. And then the tactile warning indicators that I'm showing here on the right of the screen. Is that the right of the screen? Those are primarily used to assist blind pedestrians with navigating their physical environment. So these are traditional elements that are included in wayfinding standards, and certainly they are importantly standardized. The font size of signage is standardized. The spacing of tactile warning indicators, the size and shape of those, it's all standardized in our Canadian policies. Lighting, the levels of lighting required in various scenarios, lighting around a sign, that's all standardized. So it's really, we've done a good job in Canadian policies of including these traditional elements. What we haven't done a good job of in Canadian policy is thinking about technology and how do we standardize technology? How do we include technology in our standards processes? So we sort of what we're operationally defining technology as are systems or innovations that would exist beyond the traditional architectural elements. So beyond signage, printed signage, for example, beyond the lighting cues. So technology would be any systems or tools that sort of are outside of that scope. And they certainly can benefit a person with a disability who relies on the traditional architectural elements or who would rely on this technology to support their wayfinding processes. The benefit of technology, and this speaks to many forms of technology, not just wayfinding technology, but it can be uniquely refined to support specific needs of one user or one user group. So for instance, there's technology developed to assist blind pedestrians specifically navigating outdoor spaces. There could be technology specific to assisting people who use wheelchairs to navigate outdoor spaces. And the user needs of a person who uses a wheelchair but who has no visual impairment or a blind pedestrian could be quite different. And so wayfinding tech could be uniquely refined to support those needs. Other benefits, the wayfinding tech could support route planning, decision-making processes in real time. So somebody could pick up that GPS on their phone or that mobile app on their phone and guide them in a sort of somewhat of a step-by-step fashion rather than requiring memory to read a map and then leave that map and try to navigate the space. So certainly there are a lot of benefits to the use of technology, but there are a lot of barriers to the use of technology as well. And so if the tool or technology that somebody's adopting is not accessible for that individual or is not suitable, it could be not suitable for various reasons, then it's not serving its purpose. And there's a failure in the use of that tech or the availability of that tech. And so what we really want to do is understand, well, mostly we want to understand that point is, what are those barriers to the various technologies that individuals with disabilities are encountering? And on the flip side, what helps them? What design elements of the technology are facilitators to its use? Because if we understand the barriers and we understand the facilitators, then we really can start to think about how to include wayfinding tech in standards. And I should say not just in standards, but also this information would be valuable to tech developers as well. Okay, so when we think about wayfinding technology, we're looking to a source, and this is a review that was done, and they sort of, I don't have the resource there, sorry, I didn't cite it, but it's from Prandy et al. And they categorize the various types of technology according to what we're calling it personalized tech and publicly available tech. And so I'll just tell you how I defined personalized tech. It's personal devices that an individual would need to acquire for their own use. So this would include, we have mobile applications, we have websites, we have wearable devices, or what we're calling smart assistive devices, or what Prandy called smart assistive devices, the Prandy study. So mobile apps, we all know those, we probably all use them. Google Maps, for instance, that's a mobile app for wayfinding. Websites, there's many websites that could assist you with wayfinding in certain locations, or even within, if you go to an organization or a park, for instance, you might be able to find wayfinding information on their website. Wearables, I have an image up on the screen of glasses, and these glasses might give people real-time information as they navigate the environment. There's other types of wearables that may assist with wayfinding. Smart assistive devices, these would be assistive devices that have embedded communication features in them. So on this screen, not very well, what I'm showing is a wheelchair with sensors embedded in it. So it helps the individual locate obstacles in their path of travel. And then serves to avoid the obstacles in one's path of travel. So that would be what we're calling a smart assistive device. These are all personalized tech. The other type of technology category that we can think about when we think about wayfinding is that of public technology. And so public technology refers to the technologies located in public areas which are shared amongst the population. So these public technologies would include digital, could include digital interfaces. So this would be like the digital maps that would be at a mall. So that's a public technology, publicly available technology, or public tactile interfaces. And probably many of us have not really encountered public tactile interfaces, but some organizations, airports, for example, may have tactile maps that a user could access. When they arrive at the airport, they could get a tactile map of that airport, primarily for blind pedestrians, where they could, some airports would have a tactile map 3D printed that they could take with them. And it just gives them a map of their space. Others, it might be mounted on a wall. So you can go and interact with that tactile map to understand sort of the spatial layout of the space. So those are the categories of wayfinding tech that our survey looked to ask about the barriers and facilitators to the use of the various categories. So we did conduct a national survey. We had 282 eligible participants, and we sort of asked a couple questions. We asked, what wayfinding tech do you use? We asked, what are your experiences in terms of barriers with this wayfinding tech? And then what are your facilitators to the use of the wayfinding tech, or how can we sort of improve design? I should say eligible participants, they had to live in Canada, and they had to identify as having one or more types of disabilities and be 18 plus. So as adults, Canadian adults with disabilities was our survey sample. So in terms of the respondent demographics, I just threw up here our sort of summary table that's from the report. Not super readable, but what I'll say is that our mean age was just under 50 years old for our respondents. Men and women generally evenly distributed. We did have more men than women, but it was pretty good in terms of distribution. The major disability types that were represented within our survey were certainly mobility. And when we defined mobility, we collapsed it a bit, but mobility, flexibility, and dexterity, we kind of collapsed into there. Visual, we had about 50% of our sample identified as having a visual disability, and then so on and so forth for disability types. And we had many individuals that would identify as having multiple disability types, not just one. Okay, so when we ask people about their engagement with the tech, really not surprising, most of our sample, I should say just over 50% of our sample, say they use mobile apps to assist with wayfinding specifically. And then websites were also almost 40% of our sample used websites to assist with their wayfinding processes. Those were the personalized tech that we're most readily engaged with. And then about 23, 24%, 26% engaged with tactile or digital public interfaces. So in terms of the public interfaces, quite a few less engaged with them, but certainly we did have a portion of the sample that did use them. Okay, so like I said, we asked people about the barriers to the use of the technology, and it was an open-ended question. So we did sort of take that data, we coded it according to common themes in terms of the barriers that were reported. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just summarizing some of these themes related to barriers that, well, on this first slide, these are barriers reported that were common across the personal technologies and the public technologies. Now we do have barriers specific to each tech type or each category of tech, but we did collapse them because what we found is that the barriers weren't necessarily specific that were reported, weren't specific to mobile apps, weren't specific to websites, weren't specific to wearables. They kind of crossed all categories. And so, so what I'm showing you here are some of the themes that were common across personal and public technologies. Information provision. So this was, this sort of refers to issues that individuals faced in terms of the quantity or quality of the info they received that their tech was providing them. Lack of real-time information, one of the biggest barriers that people talked about in terms of wayfinding. So they wanted their system, their technology to give them that real-time information, and in many cases it doesn't. Specifically, actually this one was a lot to do with the websites, because websites wouldn't necessarily give them real-time information. They would then have to rely on memory for assisting if they used a website for wayfinding. Another big one with information provision was outdated information, incorrect information, non-specific information. So this was really discussed for mobile apps and websites. People are going to these, they're using the mobile apps and they want more information and they're not getting it. So the mobile apps, for instance, aren't giving them accessible routes if there's temporary construction, if there's barriers in their path of travel. So it's really non-specific. A lot of the time, there's not enough landmarks to provide queuing for the individual. So this was one of the issues with mobile apps and websites in terms of wayfinding. And then lack of alternative routes. Again, if there's temporary construction in a pedestrian's path of travel or navigation, then individuals said if the app or technology didn't redirect me, then this was a barrier for me. Compatibility. A lot of individuals spoke about the technology not being compatible with other accessibility tools. Specifically, they talked about screen readers. And again, this would have been our respondents who use screen readers, but they talked about incompatibility of websites, a lot of websites incompatible with other accessibility tools such as a screen reader. This was also talked about in terms of public interfaces, not being able to use the public interface. Interactability was a big theme that came out. People are required to use this technology while they're navigating within the real world. The real world is noisy, there's noisy environments. So audio issues were a consistently mentioned barrier. The user interface issues, so this is inaccessible websites, this is inaccessible mobile apps, just, can't change the font size, can't change the contrast, those types of barriers. Negative user experience, people talked about unresponsive websites a lot for negative user experiences. Physical design issues, this was a big one. People talked about they had to use, in a lot of cases, people have to use this device. If they're using a phone to guide them, they have to use the device while they're self-propelling a wheelchair, for example. And so the device itself not being sort of compatible, the physical device design, the requirement of using it was a challenge. Sorry, that's my example speaks to simultaneous use of the tech with the other physical devices. Physical device design issues talks about bulky or non-portable. That would be related to more of the wearables. Those are barriers that were reported for individuals, that the most commonly reported barriers that sort of cross public and personalized tech. And you can certainly, when you see those barriers, you can certainly see how those barriers are non-specific to wayfinding technology. In fact, a lot of those barriers would be appropriate for many other types of technologies as well. The other barriers that we did see, a couple barriers that were specific to personalized tech. So app discontinuation, people rely on an app and then it gets discontinued. Information unavailable in rural areas or remote areas, that was a barrier for a lot of people. Stigma, people didn't want to wear a device. This was talked about for people who, there's certain systems that require hearing aid devices and somewhat of noticeable appearance. So this would highlight someone's hearing disability, for example. And so they didn't necessarily want to do that. And then that was a barrier to its use. A big barrier to personalized tech was that some of the biggest barriers were those that demanded one's personal resources. So cost, huge, huge, huge barrier for people. The financial cost of adopting this technology for supporting their wayfinding processes. Again, I don't think that one is specific to wayfinding tech. I think that can be a barrier to any technology adoption is cost. Phone limitations and internet access were big ones specific to wayfinding tech, but again, it could be more broad to technology use where we're relying on our mobile devices. Many individuals with disabilities would have there's phone limitations. They don't have phones. They don't have smartphones. Or data plans don't support sort of ongoing use of the app during navigation. So they just don't have the data plan that could support that. Many people just said we didn't know this existed. And so existence awareness was a big barrier to personal tech. One of the barriers, or one of the themes of barriers that were specific to the public tech, is that of interactability. So with public interfaces, you're required to touch the interface. You're required to physically contact it. And so a lot of people, and this survey was done this past year in January and February of 2023, or in 2023, right? So people talked about, well, I don't want to touch a tactile interface. I don't want to touch a digital map because I have safety concerns with COVID-19, and they specifically cited that. And so just those sort of physical safety concerns. Tactile or digital maps in public spaces, there's also a huge concern with the presence of obstacles around them. So a museum or a mall might have these great maps that would provide a lot of information to someone, but then they put a planter in front of them or a garbage can in front of them, or they're in a space that's not navigable for a wheeled mobility device user. And so that was like the presence of physical obstacles was a big barrier for many people when trying to engage with public interfaces. Locatability of a public interface, also a huge problem. This was talked about by many of our blind pedestrians that engaged with the survey. They can't find it. They don't know that this map is available to them because they go into a public space and there's no queuing for that individual to tell them to get to that map. And so just unknown device location was a big barrier for a lot of people. Okay, I feel like I'm talking really fast, but we started late, so that's okay. So we take all this information, we have all these barriers, and what does it mean? What are we going to do with it? And one of our goals, as I mentioned at the beginning of this project, was really to support policy. Accessibility Standards Canada, who is funding us, they are developing a standard specific to wayfinding. And I haven't seen the standard, it hasn't come out for review yet, but one of the discussions within, many of the standards is elements of wayfinding technology are included, but there's no dedicated involvement of wayfinding technology within policy. And so what we really want to do is how can we help Accessibility Standards Canada or other accessibility standards organizations, or even other organizations, adopt accessible use of technology. And so we took all those barriers. I should say we looked at facilitators as well. And the facilitators that people mentioned mapped very, very nicely to the barriers, not surprising. So a barrier of lack of real-time information, the facilitator was, this tech provided me with real-time information. So it was almost a one-to-one. So many of the facilitators mapped to the barriers. So I'm not presenting the facilitators here. We will have a final report, and we have a detailed table of facilitators and barriers. And so if you're interested, when that report comes out, it'll get put on our website. So in terms of the barriers and facilitators, we sort of thought of the functional implications of these. If we want to guide policy and the inclusion of technology within policies, we really need to support or address these barriers and support the use of the facilitators under these kind of themes of what is the functional implication of it. So how do you support decision? Many of these barriers, many of the facilitators, if addressed, could support decision-making processes for individuals. They could support the organization and communication of information for individuals who use wayfinding tech, could support the use in real-world public settings. And then I'll speak to this final category is kind of how do we support broader use and implementation? And I think this category of recommendations speaks beyond just inclusion in a wayfinding tech standard or a wayfinding standard. It's sort of broader. How do we support technology adoption for people with disabilities? Okay, so in terms of, I am going to go faster through these so we have time for questions. So in terms of supporting decision-making processes, when we thought about all those, barriers, we really did think about the decision-making. So decision-making being critical for successful wayfinding. We have route familiarity, we have external environmental conditions, trip purpose. They all contribute to the complexity of the decisions that are required along one's journey. So people need to make decisions during the preparation, during the orientation, during active navigation. And all of these decisions that one makes could affect their safety efficiency, could affect their comfort during the route. And so when we think about the barriers and we present the recommendations to policy, this is sort of how we framed it. It's how would you consider adoption in a policy? Well, providing flexibility in route planning, providing more specific information for individuals. This could include landmarks. This could include waypoints that are identifiable that help individuals with those decision-making processes. Providing up-to-date information, real-time information. Flexibility of rerouting one of the technology, rerouting someone, and then clear visual representation on the user en route. So all of these sort of elements, if a technology is going to be included in the standard, maybe these are considerations for technology. And these, we're not telling the tech designer how to design their tech. We're just saying include these elements. And I think that's important because we know that tech changes so rapidly. But it would be prudent that when a tech is designed to assist with wayfinding for people with disabilities, that these elements are considered. To support the organization and communication of information. So again, these are just sort of, speaking to the barriers that we talked about. We're presenting information in plain language. Many of the barriers that were spoken about were with respect to the web content and apps not being accessible. You can't change the font size, you can't change the contrast. We do have web accessibility guidelines that would speak to the accessibility of presentation, organization, and accessibility of these systems. And so just adherence, making sure that tech adheres to the most up-to-date web accessibility guidelines would be very important for its inclusion in a standard. And then that speaks to the customization of settings as well. I think that's included in the web accessibility guidelines. Just the availability of virtual or live support, if that's possible for the tech, it would be it would support its use. Many people talked about the flexibility, or some people would say, I don't want a lot of information. It's too much information for me, this sort of step-by-step guidance. And some people said, I want step-by-step guidance. I want to know where I'm going. I can't route plan in advance. And so just having the tech be flexible in the quantity or complexity of the information that it provides. Certainly, just being able to communicate what public wayfinding resources are available at a site. Existence awareness was a big barrier that people talked about. So if a museum or a public space, a public park has a wayfinding technology or any wayfinding resource available to individuals with disabilities, making that publicly, communicating that appropriately. In real world use, so we do all this research in a lab, it's very controlled, but if you're going to take this out into the real world, it's not controlled. We have noisy environments, we have other pedestrians, other vehicles. And so how do we support use in the real world? Big one was availability, or our recommendation is availability of multimodal information. This could speak to a lot of barriers. One being locatability. People can't locate the tool or the digital kiosk or the tactile map, but if they entered a space and there was an audio cue that guided them to that, then perhaps they could locate it. A blind person trying to interact with the digital kiosk was a barrier for many of our respondents. And so having not just sole reliance on digital signage or digital kiosks, and rather having multimodal information, presenting it in different modes. The consistency of design features in public spaces, that was a big recommendation. Clearance of physical and sensory barriers within public, specifically within public interfaces. This, I think this is already kind of included in standards, but it's not necessarily always adopted. And that actually speaks to maintenance and cleanliness and safety of these public interfaces. Keeping them clean, keeping them maintained, but also keeping them sort of safe in terms of the surroundings. The broader support for the use and implementation of wayfinding technology. So this is really where I talk about, and sort of what our team kind of thought was, it's not specific to wayfinding tech. It could be more broad to all tech. Of course, wayfinding tech being important to help people with this this process that many of us don't consider to be challenging, but it could be for many. Funding supports to adopt technology. One of the biggest concerns was funding, the financial strain on individuals to adopt the technology. It costs money to download apps, costs money to use the apps, costs money to run their data plans, if they even have a data plan. So that was important. So funding supports for the individual, but then also funding supports for organizations. Can an airport, can a museum, can a hospital increase use of audio beacons throughout the space? Audio beacons being a text system that is widely adopted and helpful for people with disabilities. Widely helpful for people with disabilities, but not necessarily widely adopted. The printing of tactile maps could be relatively inexpensive to give to somebody, but certainly supports for the organization to increase use of these kind of tools. Education on social supports. Many people talked about, and this speaks to funding again, could there be increased educational or social supports to help people train in the use of this technology to assist with wayfinding? Technology literacy was a big theme that came out that I didn't really touch upon, but just this demand of somebody to understand the technology, because we're moving into such a society where we use technology, but not everyone understands its use. And so is there education or social supports that could help with improving tool use? Some people spoke about a centralized, our stakeholders sort of brainstormed a centralized source for information that could assist with the existence awareness for people. And then improved connectivity. This is just, we talk about this all the time in lots of different scenarios. This isn't specific to wayfinding tech, but being able to connect in those remote or rural areas. Since we're relying on internet connection for the use of wayfinding tech, we need to improve connectivity, of course. Okay, wow, I spoke fast. I tried to get through it all before the end. So thanks. That's just a really quick summary of a year-long project that we did. And those recommendations are going to go forward to Accessibility Standards Canada at the end of the month. And then hopefully there's going to be some adoption of technology within the standard that's going to come out in the near future. And we welcome any suggestions for the inclusion of technology in standards or for some of our recommendations. And I'll leave it there. Thanks. I can't see Zoom, so I don't know if there's questions.
Okay, that.
Thanks.
Yeah, time for two questions. Maybe you can have that. I'll go check. Yeah,
Sure. Yeah. Come on, Anna. Ask me a question.
I don't know. Thank you so much for sharing this important stats. I wonder, because you said it's a national survey and who age people responded. So how many were invited and whether or not each and every province were represented within the sample just to understand your disability?
Yeah, that's a good question. And now I can't remember if we did try to engage nationally, because we didn't have a national stakeholder. So the KITE Foundation is a national stakeholder, and the CNIB national group. I will say that we were primarily Ontario respondents, but we did have engagement across the rest of the provinces, not to the city center of Ontario. It was a convenient sample, so it's just whoever responded. We had many more responses, but many were just not eligible in terms of engagement with tech, so if they didn't engage with tech, they were not eligible.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question for the people at home or joining remotely?
Can you hear me?
So-
I'd like to stand here. I probably.
Yeah, it's better because otherwise the people online cannot hear.
So the question was just sort of how representative was our sample in terms of national representation, and how did we engage individuals? So I said we were Ontario centered, but we did try for national engagement. But because it was a convenient sample, it really just was whoever engaged. We did have organizations, Deafblind Ontario, an Ontario focused organization, but CNIB, Rick Hansen, Canadian Disability Foundation, they're actually out in BC, so they tried to engage their members out there. But yeah, it was a convenient sample, and we used sort of advertisements through the member lists of these organizations. And then we did engagement through ads, digital advertisements as well. So people were sort of targeted with, with ads that asked them to participate if they were eligible. So we got what we got, and we were really glad we got so many individuals in such a short time period. We only collected data for 3 months. I think we kept it open for 3 months, just because of the short turnaround of this whole project. We couldn't keep our sample open for so long. I think that's it. Thanks. Yeah, Lois.
I know you're doing this on a national scale and big picture kind of thing. How does UHN do? Did you do a scan to UHN? See how we're doing wayfinding, or
no? The question was, did we sort of look at individual organization UHN specifically? You know what, we didn't, but what it's a great next step to this project, is sort of understanding how various organizations are, like, what are they doing to adopt wayfinding technologies, because it was a barrier. Existence was a barrier. Availability of tech within organizations for public tech specifically. And so looking at specific organizations or specific types of organizations, being tourist sites or hospitals or federal facilities, how well are they doing in terms of supporting wayfinding for people? Hospitals will for sure adopt the accessibility standards in terms of traditional wayfinding. So that being signage, lighting, those kind of cues. Hospitals follow accessibility standards now for that. So looking to see what they're adopting in terms of technology use would be really interesting, but we haven't gotten to there, and we didn't look at specific organizations like that.
Yeah. So first of all, great presentation.
Thanks, Anna.
Gotten a lot of different recommendations. So I was wondering if there are some prioritized recommendations that you're looking for.
No. Our ideal is that Accessibility Standards Canada will look at all these sort of suite of recommendations under the various functional implications and consider them all. Because as they develop a standard, there's no reason that they should prioritize one over the other. What I'd love to sort of think about more is the broader support for technology adoption, and where can we take that next? Because Accessibility Standards Canada, well, they have a mandate, and that is to develop their standards. They're a federal organization, but I don't want those, the implications of these barriers and what's needed to address them. I don't want that to just sort of stop with our report. And so where do we take that next? So we'll see. I see it.
I think
Someone's.
you should.
Okay, sorry.
What the question was.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Well, I guess, one more question and then we'll let you go.
I know that the idea is design, but just out of curiosity, just stratify the facilitators and barriers by disabilities. Like,
Yeah.
of course, something as a facilitator for a lot of barriers.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Maybe repeat the question.
So in terms of the barriers and facilitators, we look at barriers and facilitators stratified by disability type. Because in my presentation, I'm collapsing them across all disabilities that people represented. And so the answer is yes, we collapse them. Did we look at them specifically? No, not yet, but that is certainly a next step to diving into this data set. For standard development, we have to consider it across. And so our recommendations are trying to reflect that intersectionality of disability. Flexibility being that term that we used a lot, because if a tech is going to be included, we don't want it to present a barrier for one person to assist another group of people. And so it's just the flexibility in the design or the presentation of the design. This is always a problem in standard development for accessibility standards, is we don't want to create an undue barrier for somebody by standardizing it in a certain way. I think what's really interesting though is diving into the data, looking at the specific disability types, because I think that's valuable for tech developers that are developing something specific to a user group. And so can we help a tech developer who's looking at tech for blind pedestrians? Can we help make sure that their system or tool addresses most of the needs of that user group? And so our partner organization, Deafblind Ontario, very interested in that for their members specifically, and rightfully so. And so can we sort of start to look at it by disability type? Absolutely, we will do that. Yeah, thanks. Well, thank you, everyone. I think I'll close it to that. Thanks for coming. Okay.